Hey there everyone, Afrodo Reviews here, helping you decide, is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Let's decide. So, I'm going to start with addressing the obvious. The quality of my camera has clearly gone down quite a bit. And that's because I was forced to return to an old webcam. Why? Well, despite otherwise not being... So, my newer webcam just went out on me. I've approached it from every angle I can find, and I have yet to be able to figure out why it's freaking out so bad. It's not a software issue. I can't find anything on the outside to imply it's a hardware issue. It just stopped working. And it's been happening for a while. It's just been progressively getting worse. Because it would start with that, and I seem to be able to fix it by restarting my computer, or potentially, getting an update on my software for my computer. So I thought it was just software stuff up until I started looking up reviews on Amazon where I bought it, and realized, no, this is actually kind of a common problem. But people will have this camera for about a month. People will have this camera for about a month, and then it'll just start freaking out. Coincidentally, falling right in line to when you can't return it to Amazon anymore. So, you want my excuse? You want my thing? Don't buy that camera. It's a scam, from what it sounds like. Designed to work just long enough that you can't return it. You're gonna have to forgive me for the lower video quality lately. So yeah, you can also see videos a little more scrunched up, but I can't do anything about it, and it'll probably be like this for a while due to the I can't just go out and buy a new webcam as much as I want to. But anyways, about the book, what you guys are really here for. Today's book is a real taker in underperformance. Today's book is Murder in the Hearse Degree, written by Tim Cockey, and it was published on February 23rd, 2006. This is the fourth book in the Hitchcock Sewell series, where a undertaker who lives in Baltimore basically sticks his nose into the mysterious deaths of people, and ones he don't like, he keeps looking into. It's sort of like a private detective kind of novel. At least that's how it kind of portrayed itself. Like I said, it's the fourth in a series. I haven't read any of the ones before this. However, with detective dramas, they tend to be written with an ability to just pick them up from anywhere within and keep reading. Now, personally, I don't genuinely like to start in the middle, but I didn't know this was a fourth book when I picked it up or decided to read it. And I trusted that, like most of the detective novels, or even non-detective novels, I would at least be able to get a good understanding of what's going on without needing to read the previous four books. There's only one book after this called Backstabber, and I guess that's where the Hitchcock Sewell series ends. Apart from that, there's really not much else to talk about with this book. There's no real big praises for it, no things. The reviews I could find online are okay, I guess. Pretty decent, I suppose. So I guess we continue on. We'll go to where we always start. The cover. Now the cover is kind of bland in that there's not much going on, but I do like that it has a nice contrast in colors with a black and what I like to call honey yellow, basically filling it and mixing in with each other, with a series, like a background of hearses driving by on it. It doesn't have to catch your attention, and the punny title is what made me pick up the book to see what it was about. So, for the most part, it at least catches your attention, even if there's really not much else to look at when you start reading it. The back is very disappointing. Now, this is a dust sleeve, so the back will rarely ever have the synopsis of the story. Instead, this is quotes from people talking about, generally, most of the time, it's quotes about the book from other authors or favorable reviews. This book decides to do something different. Instead of telling me about this book, it tells me about all the other Hitchcock Sewell books. And that's a problem, because it doesn't tell me anything about this book to get me excited. I just, hey, all of his other stuff were pretty decent. You can check this out. Yeah, Bram Stoker wrote Dracula too, but then he also wrote The Lay of the White Worm, so. The synopsis is on the inside with the dust cover sleeve. And the other side is, normally, a little bio about the author. There's not much else to say about the cover. It works, but there's not much to look at when it comes to it. I don't have too much bad things to say about it, but I don't really have a nice thing to say about it either. With that, we'll basically move on to the story. Now, for those of you who've watched my TBR, you know what the basic synopsis is. But for those of you who didn't, I do recommend watching the TBR just so you know what's coming next. But for those of you who didn't, the story is basically about a undertaker known as Hitchcock Sewell, who goes colloquially by Hitch, as he is called up by an old flame, an old girlfriend he had, who tells him about her missing nanny and how she's worried something happened. Now, before Hitchcock really gets into investigating it, the nanny winds up dead after being pulled out of the Severn River. And Hitchcock, at the insistence of the nanny's mom, who swears up and down that despite the police labeling this a suicide, her little girl wouldn't do that. So he decides to look into it because the story, it seems fishy to him as well. And the story basically follows his small investigations into it, where he discovers that Sophie, the nanny, was caught up in a conspiracy that maybe even she didn't realize she had wandered into. Now, normally with books, I start off with what I liked about it. Unfortunately, for this book, I'm not really sure I can do that. It wasn't hard to read, I guess. I mean, I got through it fairly easily, and it did hold my attention in quite a few places where I wasn't aware that I was reading letters on a page. To me, this book is a lot like Magic Kingdom for Sale Sold by Terry Brooks. It's not bad, but there's not much I can talk about in terms of what I really liked. I mean, I can mention smaller details. There was one scene in here where Hitch's friend Pete tells him off and indirectly criticized the trope as a whole of Hitch's girl of the weak tendencies. For those of you who don't know detective fiction, I haven't read too many, but from what I've seen, it's very common for each book to have the main character hook up with a completely different woman in each one. I say woman typically because the POV is a male most of the time. I don't think I've read many books where the POV is a female, at least in terms of this. So I enjoyed that. There was this one huge complaint I had about the book that I could share and then realized I would have had to eat crow if I had brought it up. And that was because I couldn't figure out what year this was in. I didn't actually look up the publication date until I was writing this review. But throughout the book, it's just been so long that throughout the book, Hitchcock is constantly using payphones to talk to people. And he complains about someone who has a boombox nearby. And I'm like, Jesus, is this in the 80s? I thought this was at least modern day, because he doesn't make references to it. Obviously, it was made in 2003, which the boombox thing is still a little bit sketchy on that front, but I can at least see it, and I can understand why Hitchcock talks through payphones, even though cell phones were a thing then. Because payphones were still, he's a neophyte, as he describes himself in the book. But for the most part, I can only really the only thing I feel like I can talk about in real depth is what I felt brought this book down. Like with Magic Kingdom Sale. It's, like I said, it's not that it's bad, it's just that the bad things keep it from elevating higher, and the good things don't really balance that out. First thing I want to talk about is the man of the hour, Hitchcock himself. And Hitch is a grating protagonist for me. So, Hitch quickly wears out his welcome throughout the books, and part of the reason for that is because he tries to be this joking, sarcastic guy in the same vein of Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files. However, for most of the book, Hitch does not seem to know when to turn it off. It's constant. It's just a constant stream of jokes and just comments that don't feel appropriate for the situation. Dresden did that, yes, but there was also moments of vulnerability, moments of seriousness where it shows that while he does joke, he at least understands the weight of the scenario he's in. As opposed to Hitch, who, after getting hit by a car that took him and someone important to the case out, is joking about it immediately afterwards, even to people who are waiting for the other guy who got hit by the car to get out of surgery because they don't know if he's going to live or die. Which, unfortunately, has the issue of making him look callous and unempathetic to other people. Which I would say is a flaw, but it's not acknowledged as a flaw. In fact, most of the characters who do comment on it just be like, "Oh, Hitch, that's so you." Basically, it just, after a certain point, it gets exhausting. It's tiring to see this guy constantly joking, constantly being sarcastic, even in scenarios where it doesn't call for this or there's no reason for him to be so. And it's weird, you know? Admittedly, he does settle down near the very end of the book when they're doing with the climax and revealing the twists. It's, at that point, far too late, and the annoyance of his personality has already set in quite a bit. Another issue I had with Hitch is he has a very hypocritical view on adultery. And that seems like a minor complaint here, but it's just one of those, I don't like hypocrites in general, and there's no awareness to how hypocritical Hitchcock's being. For example, the friend who calls him up, Julia, talks about how her and her husband are going through a very rough patch right now. And Hitchcock accidentally catches her husband cheating on her with a suspect from the case. So this guy Mike is portrayed really in the wrong, how bad he is, to the point where Hitch hesitates to tell Julia because he knows how much it's going to hurt her to find that out. But at the same time, in the other chapters, he's pushing his friend Pete, who's in a rough spot with his wife Susan, and has repeatedly told Hitch that, "I know it's rough, but I am trying to work it out with my wife. I don't want to leave her. I want to work things out with her." Yet Hitch still constantly pushes Pete to cheat on his wife with a lounge singer named Lee. And it's just one of those, if the roles were reversed and this was Mike and Susan was Julia, Mike is suddenly in the wrong, as opposed to when it's Pete, Hitch suddenly thinks Pete needs to cheat. And even kind of jokingly celebrates whenever he makes Pete break his word. Because Pete is clearly attracted and loves Julie, and loves this lounge singer Lee. But he repeatedly says, "I want to work things out with my wife. Please stop pushing this." It's just one of those, it comes off as very unlikable throughout the book because of that. So another big issue I noticed in this book that started to get worse more and more as I read was the women in this book are not treated well. I don't like to just call sexism or racism on things because they're not being portrayed in the exact way I want. However, it is noticeable that throughout the entire book, her relationship with the men in her life is you're constantly made aware of it throughout the book. You, even if it's not relevant to their point in the story, they makes it a point to talk about this is their relationship with the man that's in their life. And oftentimes it's sexual. It's hard not to notice. You got the big ones like Julia, who is Hitchcock's ex-wife and she's basically a lovable sex maniac who, I'm not exaggerating here, has men literally begging for mercy with just her stamina in the bedroom. Hitchcock himself hooks up with a woman named Faith out of the blue because I don't really know why. It just kind of happens. Cockey seems to go out of his way that when he's describing a female character, at least one semi-important to the plot, he will tell you just what their relationship is in that terms. And he will tell you the history. even if it's not relevant. And this is emphasized even more when, with every single woman, you get a description of their breast size. So, and it's just one of those, these small things add up. Alone, maybe I wouldn't have said anything. Together with all the other ones, it's noticeable. The only female characters I can say are not defined by these characteristics is a character named Billy, who is Hitchcock's aunt, who taught him the mortician trade, and Chinese Peggy. That's all I can tell you about Chinese Peggy because I don't know anything else about her. I just know she exists and Hitchcock interacts with her twice. I know she's a girl because he uses she pronouns. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, which may be the biggest complaint to many people, is that the mystery in this book is sloppy. Now, it's not bad. There's definitely some interest in there, but for me, maybe it's just because I used to watch the detective shows all the time growing up. I haven't read very many detective novels, but I constantly watch detective shows. Mentalist, Castle, CSI, NCIS, stuff like that. I watched that stuff all the time with my dad and my mom as I grew up, and even these days.
I could be wrong now, but I don't think so, 'cause there's...
So to me, the mystery was super simple to solve. The moment you eliminated the obvious red herrings, the first person that comes to mind as a potential suspect is the guy who did it. And another contention I had is the timeline is really confusing. So at one point, the book talks about Sophie, the nanny, how her death was several weeks ago. And you think, wait, it's really been that long? Oh, wow, okay. Maybe he's just skipping over some days because nothing happened. But then, like, a chapter later, he talks about how Sophie's death was only a couple weeks ago. And I'm like, wait, was it several weeks or a couple weeks ago? And then another chapter after that, he talks about how it was several weeks ago again. And it's just like, I think what Cockey was trying to do here was say that it had been 3 to 4 weeks ago since she died. Here's a word of the wise. A couple is 2. A few is typically 3 or 4. And many or several is typically everything afterwards. Because at that point, the weeks have been so long, months are starting to pass. So yeah, just fair warning in the future. Finally, the biggest issue I have with the mystery is that the connection to Sophie's death, i.e. what led her to being killed, it kind of feels like it's stretching to make that connection. Like, struggling to plug it in, whereas it just doesn't feel like it would fit naturally otherwise. It's just one of those, spoiler warning, Sophie is killed by a case of mistaken identity, as the people who killed her had some knee-jerk reaction to thinking she was this person and went out and killed her real quick to get things off their back. And that's pretty much the extent of why Sophie died. It's understandable when he finally does connect it, but it doesn't feel like something that would have naturally fit otherwise. Even when the killer is outright exposed and moving into the confrontation, even then you don't have a clear idea of why did he kill Sophie, though. I suppose there is a smaller point I can make about the amount of typos in this book, which aren't a lot, but being a professionally published book is a lot less forgivable than something like SWF, which was a self-published book. And while it did kind of get me to the point where I had to look up to make sure this book wasn't a translation based on some of the weird things that I found, I don't think it's worth noting as a huge detriment. It'd be a nitpick if I was still doing the nitpick gushes section. And there was clearly the rushed romance between Hitchcock and Faith, where they have a total of 2 chapters of scene time together before they're jumping into bed out of nowhere. And it just doesn't make sense. There's like no chemistry there. Faith doesn't even really feel like a character that exists, like, until after Hitchcock is sleeping with her. In fact, I kind of thought, from the way it was worded, that she was gay and married to her boss. So it was kind of one of those, when he said that, I'm like, wait, what? Their romance is nothing interesting, and personally, I do not like the Girl of the Week trope at all. To me, it's boring. It robs you of character advancement, and it's lazy, in my opinion. In the end, none of these are making or breaking the experience. So I guess when it comes to it, this book is a 5 out of 10. Yeah, like with Terry Brooks' The Magic Kingdom of Landover book that I read, it wasn't terrible enough for me to get really upset and in arms about it, but at the same time, it isn't good enough for me to really enjoy either. That's why, unfortunately, I also believe that it deserves Mountain Dew. Yeah, normally I'd be more forgiving, I guess, but in my mind, there was nothing for me in the book. I wasn't really entertained by it. I solved the mystery quickly. I felt the explanation to Sophie's death was a little too much of a stretch for it to be a that makes sense moment. I didn't like the main character, enough so that I don't want to go find the other books of this. And it's just one of those, even the character dynamics don't feel right. So, yeah. Honestly, even if someone were to ask me to recommend this book to someone, I don't know who I'd recommend it for. I guess if you're just looking for a generic mystery novel, with a mystery detective novel where the detective isn't quite a detective, I could recommend this to you. But otherwise, I don't know who to tell to read this. Boy, that was boring. I practically fell asleep reading it a couple times. Honestly, I'm hoping the next book is much better, or I might go feral. But until then, remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure is worth having, even the bad ones. Hey guys, like I said, I'm going to start trying to do this at the end of the videos now, just see if it helps boost me a little, but if you like this video and you want to see more of me reviewing books, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. It really helps the channel grow. The YouTube algorithm is unfriendly to those videos who don't get likes, subscriptions, or comments, so any little bit helps, even if you just want to like it, you just want to comment on it. But yeah, other than that, that's what I got to say. Stay tuned for the next video. I'm sure it'll be good, right?